Okay.
Is that better?
Welcome, one and all, to yet another episode of WIC TV, a cross-ideological space where we come together to talk about issues both political and cultural, from the silly to the serious. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be talking to you about the Department of Government Efficiency, or, as it has been so named, DOGE. What is it? Who's heading it up? Is it a good idea? This is a quote, and I'll give this to you. We're still getting an echo, Chancellor. I'm sorry. I don't know.
Sorry.
Can you mute yourself when you're not talking? Maybe do a push to talk thing? Something like that?
I can try that.
Okay. Thank you. While he's doing that, let me read you a quote from the statement from the Trump JD Vance team on this new agency. Here we go. Together, these two wonderful Americans, meaning Vivek and Elon, will pave the way for my administration to dismantle government bureaucracy, slash excess regulations, cut wasteful expenditures, and restructure federal agencies, essential to the Save America movement, Trump wrote. I look forward to Elon and Vivek making changes to the federal bureaucracy with an eye on efficiency and, at the same time, making life better for all Americans. That's the quote. Gang, do we believe it? Why or why not? Let's start with you, Stacks. Go ahead. Give us what you got.
Great. So I think oh, hello. There is a famous economist who once said, if you've never missed an airplane in your life, you're spending too much time in an airport. And that basic principle was kind of just like, if you're spending so much of your energy making sure that you're trying to be as energy efficient as possible, you're losing more energy than if you would have just not cared and just sort of like move forward. And I think that definitely matters a lot when it comes to government policies or programs. If you are developing an entire government department, hiring thousands of agents, taking multiple days out of the president's timeline just to ensure that your government is as efficient as possible, it sounds like you are being inefficient.
Okay, we'll get into it as we go. Next up, we have a first-time guest on my show. Hopefully not last time, but we'll see how it goes. Not Chancellor. What do you have for us?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you. Go.
Okay.
Give us what you got. What are your thoughts?
Well, good question. I feel like I had something to say about this, but it just kind of seems pointless to argue against, because clearly there's a lot of waste in the government. Like, how many times has the Pentagon been audited and ever passed? Ever? They never passed. Pentagon has never passed an audit. So, I mean, yeah, obviously, what's wrong with, I mean, okay, I'll talk about it in a second. I need to collect my thoughts here.
We can come back to you if you need. Is that cool? Cool. Let's go to Juna. Is that how you want your name said?
My name's Jonah, but I'm Jewish.
Jonah.
So
okay, well, it says Juna on the
No,
on the Discord.
that's fine. That's totally fine.
Give us what you got, Jonah.
Yeah, I think basically it's unlikely that DOGE recommends cuts to mandatory things like Social Security, Medicare, or large cuts to the military spending for like a million reasons, and we can get into them if you want, but they're most likely to pinpoint random grants or earmarks or like things that seem ridiculous on their face. That's the things they're going to go after. These are really, really bad things to go after because, one, they're very, very small portions of the budget, like a fraction of a percent, and it won't change anything. And two, the spending is often really, really critical, but the average person just doesn't know why they're critical. There are many things that scientists and members of Congress know about their research and communities and districts and whatever that people like Elon and Vivek will never care enough to find the true purpose of, because they'll just cut it and put it on social media. It seems ridiculous to their very uneducated audience who doesn't care to look into the real purpose of these things. But it can have real damaging consequences on research, damaging consequences on the members of Congress districts themselves when they need federal support for things that most people outside of the district don't understand. There's a lot of examples of this. Happy to give those examples to the panel if they want, but I think this would be a horrible, horrible government whatever administration thing to do.
Government administration thing to do. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, the energy is hot fire here. Let's go with the last, but certainly not least for today, Ryan Mullally. What do you have?
I mean, who is this clean-shaven gentleman I see before me with this little touch of fuzz? That's this is a whole new look.
You're too nice.
Look,
Vic.
500,
Vic, sorry.
500 bucks to shave my beard. I'll take that every single day. Talk about the government efficiency in my wallet. Okay, but anyway,
Yeah.
carry on.
There you go. That's the move. Everyone shaves their beard. We get rid of the deficit. So I don't know if these are the right people to do this. If I had to pick the personalities to do this, these wouldn't be the personalities I would have picked. That said, I'm rooting for them. I think I've heard a lot of people talk about the deficit. It's a really serious problem. I don't know if they're going to fix it, but there hasn't been political will to do something about it. I guess the last time there really was the Clinton administration. So if this is a good faith attempt and people are really into it, I am rooting for them. Don't know if they're going to pull it off. I think they're going to be more successful in the thing that no one's talked about yet, which is deregulation, which is also a serious problem, but that doesn't necessarily, that's not one-to-one. You can cut a bunch of regulation without actually shrinking the deficit in a meaningful way. That might have useful benefits to the economy, and it might just be a useful pruning exercise, which I would be hugely in favor for reasons we can get into. And I think they are much better positioned to pull that off because amongst other reasons, the executive just has much more authority over the departments that he oversees. So it's much more likely that they can actually do that work. But either way, I'm rooting for them. I think they will either not accomplish their goal, or if they do accomplish their goal, they will break a lot of things along the way. So there's going to be a lot of chaos introduced by this project, which is, to me, an insufficient reason not to root for it.
Fair enough. Do you want to try again, Chancellor, or you want to just get into the discussion and we just have the discussion? Up to you.
I know he pretty much nailed it right there. Other than the fact that I do think they're the right guys for the job.
Well, let's start there. Let's start there with the discussion, and then we'll go. Why do you think Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are the right people to head this operation up? And then we'll open up the discussion and we'll go. Go ahead. Give it to us.
Well, they have a lot of experience in the private sector, obviously, both of them. They both have experience with downsizing companies. I mean, Twitter had how many employees that were just cut, totally useless for the day-to-day operations of the company. And the app wasn't affected at all. I didn't notice any slowdown when they did that, for example.
You notice all the porn bots, though?
Oh, I did notice the porn bots. That's a good point. Got rid of most of those. I haven't seen any for ages.
Okay. Agree to disagree.
So good experience in the private industry and good experience at downsizing. Okay, what does the rest of you think? Go ahead.
Chancellor, is the private sector and government spending, are those like sort of equivalent experiences? Can you do like a 1-for-1? If you're really good at the private sector, will you be really good at government?
Well, it depends on how good you are at taking other people's money.
Okay, that doesn't really answer the question.
I think
right?
there is a good faith case to be made, though, that it would almost have to be people who aren't like career politicians, because the reason that you can never cut anything is that most line items have a small faction of people who care super deeply about it, and the rest of the country cares about it, generally speaking, not that much for most things. Mm-hmm. And that could be a special interest group if it's something that it's for a specific group of people. It could also just be pork. Like, you cut a military base in a senator's hometown, that's, you're going to have real serious political opposition. So I do think there's a case to be made that if you were going to do this work, it would have to be people who are positioned to not care that much about what the political establishment has to say. For example, I don't think a first-term president, unless they've said, I'm not running again, could ever do this initiative correctly. It just wouldn't be possible because they need support for re-election. So in that sense, I think it's a fair point. Like it's the type of people you would need.
I think we're kind of talking out the side of our mouths. I think that if they were instead like career politicians and they came out and they were like, hey, I've served my life in the government, so I know exactly how inefficient, how bureaucratic it can be. And I know exactly the places to cut because I worked for them, you would also be cheering for that. Like, I just wonder.
They have one of those.
Who?
The Government Accountability Office.
Informally.
People like Rand Paul.
Well, I guess what
people
I'm
like
trying
Rand Paul from Kentucky
awesome,
are the people they're talking about who
I
who
see.
do exactly what I said. He's like
Right,
points out
right.
random grants. They're like, how are we spending $100,000 on random research that
Right.
nobody understands? Well, there's
I
good
meant
reason for
Ron
it.
Paul, but I'm sure Rand Paul is also.
That's his son. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
He's a senator.
I'm super interested in it. Yeah, I mean, I think that it is.
But I guess what I'm trying to say is,
if you categorical rule, I'm saying it's super unlikely. So yeah,
I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you point to Elon Musk and you're saying he's the right man for the job because he's outside the system, and then you're pointing to Ron Paul and then you're like, he's the right kind of the guy because he knows how the system works. Like, it's clearly that you're just kind of going to say that these are the right people for the job, regardless of what their qualifications are.
That's a really strange point, since I started off by saying I don't think.
I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to Chancellor, though.
Okay.
Well, I'm pretty sure you agree with him there.
What? No, you don't agree because you said I agree with everything except for the fact that they're the right men for the job. And you said, and Wick asked you, why are they the right person for the job? And you said, well, because they're outside of the system and that's beneficial. So how do you feel about people like Ron Paul who are inside of the system and encouraging government efficiency?
Well, I mean, if they work for the government and they think it should be cut, yeah, I'll agree with them, obviously.
Right. Okay.
So it's about ideological motivation, not actually their qualifications, right? Because they have a difference in private business versus the government. This is what I was trying to get at with you, is that in private business, you care about profit the most and primarily, and basically the only thing is your shareholders getting profit. In the government, there's so many different interests that you need to account for, and it's not about profit. It's not, do you get your money back as the government? It's, do you fulfill the obligations that you have as the government to do all of these random things? And they don't care about those things. They don't want to look into them. They're not used to researching every small little thing they want to cut, and they want the maximum attention for DOGE. He wants all of the likes and clicks and whatever on Twitter whenever he posts, we just cut another $1 million from random research grant that people don't understand, and he wants all of that attention. It does nothing for the actual budget in the government, but it gets all the attention and makes people think that they're doing something good.
I think this is losing the forest for the trees. Like the question to me isn't whether this is the perfect way to do this or the perfect people or the perfect vehicle. The question is, if not now, when?
But it's actively harmful.
I've been waiting my entire adult life for a single moment since the Clinton administration where this seemed at all likely.
Okay.
So
wait, hold on. So your argument, I just want to be clear. So your argument is this isn't perfect, but this is good, right? The policies that they will be enacting will be good. Great. Let's go over the two suggestions that I've seen from these morons. Okay. So Elon has said his big idea when he gets into DOGE is there are 400 plus federal agencies. He wants to reduce it down to 99. He has no clue which ones should go, which ones shouldn't, which one should or shouldn't go, but he said reduce it to 99. That's his policy. I need you to defend that policy, that it will be better. And I can also point you to Vivek's if you want to defend that one as well. I'll give you either one. And Vivek, I want to go over Vivek's idea real quick. Vivek's idea was, I want to look at the social security numbers of every federal employee, and if it is even, I want to fire them, and if they're odd, I want to keep them. Now, I could be misrepresenting them. I could have gotten them switched. He might have said odd, I'll keep them. Even, I'll fire them. I'm not sure. And then he says, of those remaining, I'll look at the first number, and I'll say, if those are even, then you're fired, and if they're odd, they get to keep the same. And I'm just wondering, does that feel just like eliminating completely 1/4 absolutely randomly? Like, we agree that's purely random, and you just fully remove 1/4 or 3/4 of the federal government. Do you feel like that would be beneficial?
I think you picked the policies that sound the most like puffing and posturing and avoided the one that was the most actionable.
Okay, so, tell me about, well, first off, that is something that they've said, so I do think that you would have to defend that.
Yeah,
But what if they
got maybe take Elon Musk perfectly seriously and everything he says, this would be tough life. You know,
I'm just saying
and
he's
this is
in
one
charge
thing
of a fucking government department.
Well, let's give
now. Like, I feel
hold
like
on.
we
Let's
kind of have to take him seriously.
Let's give
The
Ryan a
actual
chance to
government
answer.
department.
Yeah,
It's
go
the
ahead.
the
advisory
actually
board.
actionable policy I've seen them do.
Okay.
'Cause, I mean, it seems there's a few, but the one that seems most likely to happen, just because of the way the Supreme Court landed, is Vivek's idea that following. I want to make sure I say the name of the case correctly. It's Loper Bright Enterprises, where Chevron deference was struck down. What this executive could do is direct his agencies to rescind bulk regulation. And that would be very challenging for the next administration to unwind, because when you pass a new regulation, you're going to have to withstand challenges to it, and you no longer have Chevron deference. And what they could do is they could say, well, in light of this case, we don't even think these regulations are legal anymore. We think that we should let them go. And then you release an enormous amount of federal regulation. I think, as I said at the beginning, that's the one that they are most likely to accomplish, because it's a lot easier than the budget. I think they could do that, and I think we probably should reduce regulation by a large amount, just to reduce the size of the government, to get rid of some of the huge spider web that people have to avoid.
I want to actually highlight this, because I do have a question for Jonah and Daxioms real quick. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm
Whatever.
My beard went away, and half my brain too. Okay, it's just half.
Yeah, how often have I shown up on your shows, bro?
It's crazy. It's crazy.
You forgot my name?
It was like Samson, no beard, no muscles.
True.
That's what it is.
True. But on that, right? Is there no benefit to reducing the size of the government and the excess that bureaucracy brings?
I could answer that. I do think that there are some. So I think that sometimes we're caught in a little bit of, like, I think there's two different conversations going on, and I would agree with one far more than the other. The first is the Department of Government Efficiency trying to reduce, like, bureaucratic nonsense of just like, here's all the line items on the bill, and like they don't account for anything, or government regulations that private companies need to follow. And I kind of want to narrow into one of these, because there are certainly a number of regulations that I disagree with. I think that good regulations are good and bad regulations are bad. Okay, I'm like, it's pretty simple as that. Yeah, I think that. Yeah, no, true, exactly. I think I could point to a number of licensure agreements that, like, doctors have to follow and teachers have to follow, that I think are a little ridiculous and kind of lead to shortages in those specific departments. That maybe you don't have to take a test every year. Maybe you could take a test every 5 years, and you don't have to pay for that out of pocket. Maybe the government could subsidize it. Things like that lead to shortages. Yeah, sure, we can have targeted regulations and say, is this really beneficial? Let's strike it down. But I think just sort of that writ large, let's just get rid of government regulations. I don't know, because you're not really saying, here are the ones that I dislike, here are the ones that I like, and here's why I want to take these things down. Because I would be happy to take things down that have regulations that I feel like are bulky, unnecessary, and actually lead to the detriment of the populace. But that doesn't really seem to be the rhetoric that's described.
Because that's not possible. Honestly, it's not possible.
Okay.
You can't, I think the federal government printed 90,000 pages of regulations last year. It was like, it's between 70 and 90,000 most years. And what that means is, and by the way, I say this from the perspective of a lawyer who often represents regulated entities in defense against the government.
But Ryan, you know
regulations
that's across hundreds of agencies,
right,
with tens of thousands of people working in them. So
yes,
you divide now the 90,000 pages of regulations. A lot of those pages, as a lawyer, aren't the actual regulations. They're just a lot of legalese. So stop with this, like, number of pages. Yes, that we know doesn't actually matter.
No,
100%. Because here's what frustrates me. Here's what frustrates me as well. Because I can point to a number of politicians who say, hey, this is a regulation that I am advocating for striking, because one specific person said, hey, this is, like, I just watched this video of a government official who said, hey, I can't feed children milk, and I can't feed the kids that I'm babysitting, because that's, like, technically I become like essentially like a cafeteria worker. Yeah, but I can just give them like fucking, like, just random snacks or something that aren't healthy for them, and that's fine. And I think that that's bad. And then the like because one person is affected by that policy, sure, that's a policy that I would never be aware of because I don't work in that industry. But those people who work in those industries have hyper awareness of the regulations that are specifically detrimental. Like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Sure, we probably want qualifications, but it leads to bad outcomes, so we should strike it.
Which is why members of Congress are the best people to advocate for those regulations to be either removed or put in place, because they actually talk to people in their districts. And turns out we have a person in every district that learns from people in their district. And so it actually is good to have government officials being the ones that recommend removal of a lot of these regulations. And we see that in both parties right now. There are Republicans and Democrats who want these regulations to be removed that are being harmful. But mass sweeping removal of regulations is not impossible to do one by one. It's very possible to do one by one. You have tens of thousands of people working these agencies. If you really wanted to, you could hire 100 people to look through the entire regulatory infrastructure of the U.S. It would not be that expensive. You'd probably save a lot of money, but they don't want to do that because that would be seen as inefficient. And you would have to hire government officials. No, it's not. They're just mass sweeping, get rid of stuff. They're gonna put stuff on social media that's like random grants that nobody understands the purpose of, and that's gonna be what they do. They're gonna have a lot of public appearance, but not have a lot of real tangible impact besides cutting things that actually can have a lot of benefit.
Let's give some space to Chancellor. Chancellor, you have a response? Go.
You're getting emotional about this. It's just a very simple, it's not a government program. They're advising the government. None of this might not even happen if Congress doesn't agree, or if there's not enough pressure or enough views on what they're actually trying to cut. Nothing will happen.
That's not how this works at all. He can form this and appoint these people to special positions if he wants to. Congress does not have to agree to it. They can cut many things from the executive branch. Congress does not have to agree to it. The things they do have to agree to are the mandatory programs that make up a vast majority of our federal budget. So things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. These are things that Congress does have to agree for major sweeping changes that make up the majority of our budget, that they can't cut and won't cut because it's unpopular to cut, because Congress has to approve it. And so they're only going to cut the small things that make up a very, very minuscule portion of our budget that actually have major impacts if they have like a scientific breakthrough or something like that. But they're going to cut those things because the average American doesn't understand the benefit of those things when scientists and the members of Congress are asking for those things.
You're switching back and forth between regulation and budget, and they are different, so I'm trying to keep them separate because it's a pretty different exercise.
Sure.
The thing about cutting them one by one is that you never get anywhere, and you never get anywhere because you're dealing with entrenched bureaucracies. And when you come in there, you have to expend political capital for the cut, and then there's a process. And by the time you get through a round, and let's say you cut a few regs, it's midterms. And your mandate's gone. Like, if you're going to do this, you have to do it in the window when you actually have a mandate and you have will to do it. Like, I think if this doesn't happen in the first 2 years, probably in the first 100 days, it's not going to happen. So I don't think incrementalism could work. And if you guys will indulge me, just because I think it's an illustrative story, this is all public, so you can look at the docket for the District Court of DC. But I represented a company called Navient, which in pertinent part does student loan servicing. And back in the days, if you want to go all the way back in the day, student loans were considered a good thing. And people and companies that did student loan work were rewarded by the government because they were desperately trying to increase the amount of student loans available. And at that time, there was a new regulation. Navient went to the government and said, hey, this new regulation looks like we're going to make a bunch more money on this category of loan than you thought we would if we do what you said. Is that right? And then the government published some guidance, and it said, you can make this money. And then they published another piece of guidance, and it said, yep, same thing, copy paste. 20 years later, Navient gets audited because the political winds have changed. And they say, give us that money back. That's not your money. And we go to the district court and we say, they said we could have the money. Why do we have to give it back? And the Department of Education's official position was, when we told you that you could have the money, our guidance was illegal, and you should have known better than to rely on it. Now, they got laughed out of court, thankfully, but what the story illustrates is that when you have this spider web of regulations that covers everything, and it's never rescinded, when the political will changes, they can snap back on basically anyone because it's impossible not to be in violation of something because there's so much old, outdated garbage on the books. There is there's two classes of people this benefits. Primarily people like me. It's great for lawyers. It's a full employment act. We get to make a lot of money with this regulatory state. It's great for big companies that hate small companies, because if you can't afford lawyers like me to deal with the regulatory mess, you can't compete. But if you don't clean the books out now and again, it just grows. It never goes back. And we can talk about incrementalism, but it never ever happens. So if there's a will to do it now, we should do it.
Ryan, if you think they're going to, if you think the types of changes they're going to make are going to be ones that are harmful to big businesses that are taking advantage of the regulations to cut out small businesses, you're foolish. Because of course, like the largest business owners and the Wall Street investors, a lot of whom donated to Trump's campaign, like hedge fund type people who donated millions and millions of dollars, are not going to want their big companies that they're investing in to be to now lose probably billions of dollars from not being able to take advantage of these regulations anymore.
Well,
and Elon and Vivek both know that. They both come from this world. They understand exactly what you're talking about with how big companies take advantage of the regulatory system. And so again, wrong people for the job. If you want exactly, I know I'm agreeing with you, but any hope that you had that this is actually going to happen on that point is just not true.
On that, and I want to ask you directly, Ryan, so you'll be able to respond, right? Is there not a conflict of interest when it comes to Elon, especially since he does get government subsidies, contracts? He does head up huge corporations and companies that I assume are related to, subject to, and use a lot of the regulations that are being talked about. So isn't there just like a direct conflict of interest when Elon's
that is likely why this is not really a department? Like, really what this is Elon and Vivek, and maybe they hire some interns, and they're advising the president. Like, they have no formal government role, and they're not going to have, to my knowledge, there's no cabinet position, there's no actual department. So
there's no oversight is what you're saying. There's no way to hold them accountable. There's just, they have a direct line that they can call up the president at any time and make a suggestion, and oh, don't worry, remember, Trump, I donated millions and millions and millions to your campaign, so are you going to listen to me? Right? It just feels...
The only difference there is that we actually know about it.
We don't know the conversations that happen. We don't know, but we don't know the conversations that happen. We do know when like the department head of an actual government department, like an HHS secretary, makes a recommendation, like they put out a press release publicly that they're going to change some regulation, they're going to change something. You don't know that's going to be the case with Elon Musk and Vivek. And especially true is that Trump doesn't care enough to look into if these small little he'll get a list of all of these different regulations and cuts to government, and he'll just sign off on it. Because do you think he actually cares, or his team actually cares enough to look through each and every one of these? It's not going to be politically damaging to them if it's not Social Security or Medicare or the military. And so of course they don't care, and they don't care the damage that it causes.
So I have a question. Like, I really want to have a pointed question, like a substantive, like I want kind of like an answer if you were in charge of budget reconciliation or the government of department, the Department of Government Efficiency, right? You say incrementalism is not the way. Okay. You say we cannot do this as like a line item, point by point. Here are the places to strip it, because that's just never going to work. Like, what sweeping changes would you remove? Are you going to get rid of the entire FDA? Like, are you going to get rid of the entire, like, I'm not saying that you're going to say that. I'm just saying, give me an entire budget that would make a meaningful change on the budget of government. And if it's like a small potatoes thing, if it's less than 1% of the government budget, I'm going to say that doesn't count, because we are talking about.
Are we switching to budget from regulation?
He doesn't think the budget will change, really, which is.
I think they're much likely to change the budget.
Okay,
I wish them well.
I think that Elon and Vivek disagree with you. I think that they have specifically targeted government bureaucracy.
$1 trillion
because and say that there's going to be a budgetary change.
Spending is just such a tiny fraction of the budget.
But there's a reason.
Like, discretionary spending is like 30%.
Well, hold on. Let Ryan give you his answer for a regulation, because I'm curious to what his answer would be too. Right? What group of regulations?
What needs to actually happen is that you go to the department heads and you say, we want to remove, and this is why they're giving these kind of like arbitrary numbers. we want to remove a huge percentage, let's say 50% of your regs. We
Oh,
want to get
speaking of
60% of your
efficiency,
regs.
$2 from Psychor giving me money. The most efficient use of your money is to super chat to Wick. Is department? He says Department of Deficiency, more like. Got him.
Yeah.
Okay,
Nice.
but yeah, the most. If you like this content, give me money. Anyway, Ryan, sorry to interrupt you, but go ahead.
You give the department heads a mandate to cut enormous percentages of the regulations. Then realistically, what happens is some stuff breaks, and you have to reenact regulations to fix the things that broke. And likely, what that means is you cut like 50, you reenact 10. And then at least you've trimmed some brush. And the downside is, because there are trade-offs. The downside is things will break. There will be things that break short term and that need to be fixed.
Wait, okay,
All right,
hold on.
Staxian, let me do two quick things. Okay.
Okay.
One, obviously, okay. To address that, things breaking is incredibly damaging. If things break in the regulation of lead in pipes, that's incredibly damaging for an entire generation of people coming for wherever they broke. Things breaking is really, really, really bad, even in the short term, and it's way worse than the current status quo where things can be inefficient. So that's one. But two, I also don't even agree that they're going to go after regulations that, like, at the extent that you say they are. They want the most attention-grabbing, headline-producing things that they can get, which are giant price tags attached to things. If they say we cut $1 million from X program that people don't understand the purpose behind, those are the things they're going to go after. And so while I appreciate your attempts to give them the benefit of the doubt, that's not what they're going to do, because that's not what generates most
Can I
attention.
tack on to the point?
Like that's how he explained it.
One at a time. Chancellor, you haven't gone in a while. Give it to you. Then Ryan. Then Staxiums. That's the order we're gonna go in.
Oh, I don't really have much to say. I was just gonna say, Juno, do you think this is a publicity stunt?
For the most part, yeah.
I agree. Or actually, sorry, let me
Any follow-up to
fully
that?
answer that question. Let me fully answer that question. I think that it's probably Elon and Vivek have a genuine misunderstanding of government, and they have this perception of they're going to build this department, and they're going to look through the line items, and they're going to see that 60% of it is nonsensical and can be cut, and then they're going to be fucking heroes of the public.
No,
Then-
Saxiums, you're wrong, and let me tell you why. Because
Okay.
I'm just telling you, if I was given like this kind of like a SOP, if you will, like, here you have a direct line, you can call me at any time, by the President of the United States.
Mhm.
You know the first thing I would do? How am I going to use this to benefit me? They're not. You know what?
I disagree.
That's what they're looking
I'm like,
for. Like, how am I
I
going to make some money off of this?
I understand where you're coming from. I don't think that that's conspiratorial. I don't think that that's crazy. I just think I think that they think of themselves as fucking heroes of the public.
Oh, I think of myself as a hero too, but you got to eat.
I don't
right?
think they're as distinctly selfish as you're putting forward, but I could be wrong. You could be right about Elon. I'm not trying to say here's
well, I'm
my
not just
position.
saying it about Elon. My point isn't that they're uniquely anything. It's that if you give anyone that much access to power, they are going to, no matter they could be. You can give Mother Teresa that kind of access, and they are going to some extent, use it for self-benefit. Because why wouldn't
I mean,
you?
I agree. I think that from my perspective, what Elon and Vivek, their motivation is I want to be fucking champion of the people. And I have Ryan's perspective where I've dealt with bullshit regulations and I know there's so much of it and it's going to take up 50% of the budget. I'm going to go in, eliminate them all. I'm going to post it on Twitter and everyone's going to be like, holy shit, why did that regulation even begin with in the first place? And I'm going to shrink the budget by a specific, by a distinctive amount because of all of that wasteful money that's going in that position. And then they're kind of going to come back as heroes. But what's really going to happen is they are going to get into those places and be like, what the fuck is this for? They're going to have to spend so much research trying to figure out what it is that they're essentially going to have to make a choice between two. Either one, kind of quietly slink out of the corner and pretend like they never made these promises, or two, make huge budget restrictions, which will be decried by most of the public, and we'll see the biggest blue wave in 2026 that we've ever
I don't
seen
think they'll
in our
do
lives.
either of those things. They're going to make small cuts that appear as if they're a big amount of money to most people, and they're
Mission
going to
accomplished
like
banner.
champion it as a huge. You're going to say it's a huge huge accomplishment. It cut almost zero of the federal budget. They're going to cut
I
almost
agree
no
with you.
almost no actual important regulations. They're going to cut old regulations that were on the book that people don't really care about, that aren't really followed anyway or not really enforced anyway. They're going to cut a lot of those, and they're going to cut small amounts of money from the budget. Everyone's going to think they're heroes. They're going to get a lot of attention on social media, and that's going to be it.
You know who
That's
an
me.
actual
If I was
hero
a
is,
betting
real quick,
man,
and then I'll let Ryan go. An actual hero? Philosophical Zombie Hunter for £5. Malay deregulated the rental sector in Argentina, and supply went up by 171%, and rental costs went down by 40%. And just to address that, honestly, if you're going to slash regulations, yes, that's the place to do it.
Here's my
actually.
problem with that.
NIMBY
Here's my
shit,
problem.
yes.
Exactly. Here's my problem.
Well,
okay.
gotta let Ryan go before
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I wanted to respond to that comment.
But Jonah, I actually think
Trump is advocating for
if I was a
different
betting man and I was putting money on the outcome, I think you have predicted the correct outcome. I think that's the odds-on play, is that there's a lot of noise and this doesn't live up to its promise. When I say I'm rooting for them, I'm not saying I would bet on it working, but I do think, like when I look at my kids and their lives, and I look at the deficit, and I look at the fact that it's what's our second biggest line item now and growing, and how do you solve that problem, like the interest on debt problem? The answers are pretty bad. You either do something drastic to your spending, you declare war likely on China, or you inflate your currency and play games with your currency to the point where the debt becomes more manageable. Those are very bad solutions. And I mean, like, honestly, if you had caught me 15 years ago, I would have been arguing for the incremental solution because I really wanted it to be true. It's just that it never happens. It never happens. So if we have some bulls in the China shop right now, I think we should root for them. Will it work? I don't know, but I hope it does.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm optimistic.
So I have a counter to this. So this was my point 3 for Jonah's. He gave point 1, point 2. I have a point 3. So let me make sure I'm understanding your arguments. I'm going to reiterate it real quick. You're saying, look, here's what we're going to do. We're going to tear down 50% of the regulation. Then we're going to see what breaks, so we know what's vital, and then we're going to rebuild it back up, and it'll be like 10%. Okay, is that correct? It's a fair assessment, right?
That seems to be what Vivek was proposing.
Here's my issue with this. Didn't the regulations to begin with get there because something was broken and we were trying to remedy it?
You'd think.
Okay, like, can you give me an example of a regulation that is essentially there not to fix a problem, was advocated for by politicians? Like, because here's the thing. I look at regulations and I go, oh, obviously we're going to want to regulate whether doctors can take tests and know how to deal with their patients. Okay. It's clearly trying to be beneficial. Okay. But then it doesn't end up kind of working, kind of creates a shortage in that industry. Okay. I can see where, like, it's trying to be beneficial and ends up failing. Okay. But we're still trying to course correct for a problem, which is doctors need to be qualified for the positions because we trust doctors. So how are we not just back to square one, where we just reverse the time clock 100 years and then we're just going to get back to the exact same problem we have right now, where we're just trying to rebuild the government regulations, trying to fix problems because we didn't learn anything about why they broke because we slashed 50% of it?
So two things. First, medicals that's state, it's not federal, so it's just not one of the things that's going to be changed.
No. You misunderstood what I was. Okay, I agree.
The second is the problem with the bloat of regulation isn't the intention. The problem is that when you have these like giant Byzantine spider webs of law and regulation, what you do is you essentially put all power into the discretion of the current executive, because they can make anything illegal because there are so many laws and regulations that nobody knows what they are and nobody knows.
You're not grappling with my question. Hold on, sorry. You didn't answer my question. My question is, how are we not just disassembling the cobweb and then just rebuilding it back exactly as it was before? Because what we're doing is we're slashing 50% and we're just saying, okay, well, now we're just going to take care of the things that were needed beforehand, but that was the exact same motivation that got the regulations to begin with. So all you're really doing is saying
getting rid of the bloat that allows the government to essentially
Hold on.
criminalize any behavior they like
Okay.
at any time.
But
how do you-
no, hold on, because I want an example. Like, we're talking about regulations. I want an example of what you consider a specific regulation that you consider to be harmful and bloated. Give me one.
You want me to look up a statute for you?
Just give me off the top of the dome. You don't have to cite
But
the
here-
statute. Off
I
the
would
top of the
actually
dome. I got one I could give you right off the
I
top of
can,
my dome.
I can give one too.
Yeah.
And I gave one too, which is kind of interesting that the people who are advocating for keeping the government around clearly know the government well enough to say, here are the statutes that I feel like are bloated.
Just one.
Then they should be cut.
What I would prefer actually is for you to say, here's a chunk, right? And then we'll pull things out and say, wait,
I'll
hold on,
even
is that
give you a
beneficial?
chunk.
Because
The housing market, the bloat around
fucking
development,
waste!
the bloat around
Holy
zoning
shit.
laws,
Hell
and
yes.
all those
Wick-
regulations surrounding
Wick, your
that
problem-
shit. We need to.
Your problem is those are not federal; those are state.
I
laws.
understand,
Well, of course.
okay, but I don't
They're
care who
not
does
even
it.
state.
Someone needs to do it. Get your state on the
100%.
line. Get that machete.
Go to your fucking city council.
Get
I'm with you.
Malay's
I'm
little
with you.
chainsaw
And
that he uses.
Literally
Vroom, vroom, that
shit
shit.
in the mouth
and let's
of
go.
every old person who says, no, don't build those fucking apartments here. They're ruining the... Yeah, no, 100%. Yes.
So, to your point,
Based Gimby Wick.
I'd give you the example I gave earlier, which is that set of regulations around student loans. This is not my personal issue, but it's because it was a client of mine. I know it better. This set of regulations around student loans that essentially made it totally legal to do one thing. They then issued a series of interpretations of their regulations saying that you were allowed to do that thing, then issued a finding against the company that it was illegal for you to rely on their own representation.
Here's my problem. That's
the exact
incrementalism.
example I'm talking about, because they have a law.
But the
they
court-
have
the court decided with
regulation,
them.
They have
Right.
a guidance under the regulation, and then they can do anything they want with it because it's a totally open playbook.
The court
Two
decided.
things I
with
have,
them.
two things I have frustrations
God.
with. First
Thank
is
God.
that First is that these regulations don't exist in a vacuum. They have to be agreed upon in a court of law with a jury, which means that if you pull some fucking ancient regulation, like, yeah, adultery is illegal in some states. When has that ever been charged in the history of the United States for the last fucking
How hard it
50
is to
years?
get to a jury?
what?
It's
You know how
not.
hard
It's
it is to
usually
get
not
to a
juries.
jury?
Yeah.
No,
it's
sure.
First of all,
usually not
you're
juries.
probably not getting to a jury at all.
Sure.
But-
No, of
but
course.
you know-
But you understand
you know
that,
who
but that's
adjudicates
always
that
in the back of the mind.
The department. We had to go through multiple layers of departmental findings where you go before an ALJ. We actually went before the acting secretary, and then the acting secretary says, hey, guess what? When I said earlier for you to fuck yourself, I meant it. And that process took a year and a half.
Okay, but here's my problem. Isn't this just incrementalism because you're just advocating for specific statutes that disadvantaged you?
You asked me for an
Or your
example.
client.
The
No.
example I have is the example that I've used in my
The
work
fucking
life.
broad
What
bit,
is
like,
it,
I want student
what do you
loans
want?
deregulated.
To be fair, I did ask him for a specific example.
Okay, that's fine.
That's
That's
the
fine.
first thing, yeah. I mean,
Okay, fine. But I have a follow-up question, which is
But
going to be
the
that
thing
question.
is
that I
this.
just had.
No, the answer to that question is that nobody actually knows what's in the regulations, and that's the problem. Nobody knows. And
Nobody knows
so-
all of the regulations, but they certainly know the types of regulations that affect them.
So
Yes, that they directly work.
That's why there needs to be a clearing out. And the whipsaw.
Wait, what's
where
why?
the
Hey,
government
Ryan,
can just
Ryan,
do
what is why
anything
there needs to be
they
clearing out? Is it not okay that people specialize in their department? Is that not a thing that's okay? Like, so if someone in the EPA knows, and they're in a very specific section of the EPA, if there's 20 to 100 regulations under them, and they know those, but they don't know the HHS regulations,
Who do you
that's
think
fine,
should be
right?
doing these cuts? Like Vivek
what do you mean?
Vivek and Musk can't cut a damn thing. What they can do
I
is they
understand.
can tell the president, we recommend this, and then
Right.
he's going to
And
tell
they'll
his
blanket approve them.
agency head to cut this, and all
they
the
will
bureaucrats
approve
that
them.
you're talking about are going to weigh in, That's what
No,
the problem is.
no. It stops there. It stops there. He appoints
Correct.
people that are loyal to Trump as the department heads. They make the final decision. The bureaucrats who are there for 20, 30 years deeply understand the regulations will not get a say in if they are cut or not. Trump will blanket approve them or tell the secretaries to do it, and they will do it because they are all loyal to him. The people that deeply understand the regulations the most and the impacts that they will have on the communities that are supposed to be protecting, those people will not get a say in if these are coming.
This is the problem, is that this is the classic situation, and this is why we never get anywhere on things like the debt either. It's also why, quite frankly, why climate change is tough, but that's another topic.
No, I agree. This is why we don't get
When
anywhere with that.
Let
because
Ryan
people
finish. Let Ryan finish.
completely
Go ahead.
misunderstand.
When there's a really diffuse harm, there's a harm that's big and hard to track down, and it affects everybody in little invisible ways. And then you say, when we cut this, oh my God, this one person is deeply affected. The politics are really bad. The optics are really bad. It's very, very hard to do, which is why the incremental approach never works. The only way it works is that you have a bonfire and things break and you accept the trade-off and then you rebuild from there. So if you want to do it, it's like the only way to do it.
Wait.
I
Steph,
need you
let's-
to answer this question. What would you throw in the bonfire? And don't give me a single statute. Don't give me like a set of regulations. Give me a fucking heap of papers, and you don't know what's in it, and you throw it in the bonfire.
Federal communication regulations. Let's go.
Pick 20,000 of the 90,000 pages and put them in the fire.
Yeah, like give me a huge fucking chunk. Because you said you wanted to slash 50%. I'll give you 1%. Give me something that takes up 1% of the regulations that you say you want to throw into the bonfire. And then we'll pick and choose, and we'll go, okay, well, let's look at what you discarded and see the impact that those regulations took from society. I think that would be the most beneficial.
I think they are
path forward.
correct to start with the DOE. The DOE has...
The Department of Energy.
No,
Education?
Department of Education.
Department of Education, yeah.
Department of
Okay,
Education.
The Department of Education has a enormously disproportionate amount of say in how education is performed compared to the amount of money it's giving out to states and schools. And it does not seem to have a great track record. No Child Left Behind was a disaster. The Common Core was like not that great. And I'm a former teacher, by the way. So again, I can only pick examples that I have some familiarity with because it's just hard for me to know I'm not an energy lawyer. I don't know what's in the energy regs.
I can give you
appreciate
an
this.
example of this, actually, of some educational, but they're state regulations is the problem. This is what we keep coming into. They're state regulations. So Pennsylvania,
Ryan,
if you want to
won't that
be
most of-
if you want to be a teacher in Pennsylvania, you have to have college credits from a university in Pennsylvania, right? I don't know the percentage off the top of my head. I just know this from talking to teachers in Pennsylvania, right? I'm not a teacher in Pennsylvania, to be clear.
Right.
I've talked to a few of them, right? And they have expressed frustrations to me. They've been accredited in places like Florida where they've taught before, or places like California where they've taught before. But if they wanted to teach high school or elementary school in Pennsylvania, they were told that, they couldn't. They needed to get something from some college credits from the state of Pennsylvania. That seems ridiculous to me.
Mhm.
That seems like something we could do away with, something that would help solve the teacher crisis, right? And there is a crisis, there's a shortage. And so I'm not entirely against maybe taking a look at this Department of Education stuff. But the problem is, and this is against Ryan's point, that's not a federal regulation. That's
Well,
a
I think
state
this is
one.
also against Ryan cannot agree with Wick. Wick agrees with us because what Wick is advocating for is incrementalism. He's saying, hey, there are specific statutes that I feel like disadvantage. Obviously, we want our teachers qualified, right? No one's going to disagree with that. But if it leads to shortages, it's a bad regulation, so we should cut it. That is incrementalism. We look at the impacts of that specific regulation. We say we cut it. And that is an exact example that I gave at the top. I said there are regulations that lead to shortages of doctors and teachers. That's what I said at the beginning of the segment. So I agree with Wick. But you are advocating for cutting the entire Department of Education. Is that correct, Ryan?
No, I was saying cut large aspects of it.
Okay, so you want to do it vaguely randomly, right? Because you're okay with things.
No, let him tell us what he wants. Ryan, go ahead.
The reason you're having a hard time with what I'm saying is that you're presupposing something that I've ruled out, which is that incrementalism is possible. If I believed incrementalism was possible, I would agree with you. I think incrementalism is better than fire sale. But I think fire sale is better than doing nothing.
I understand.
And in my entire political life, the movement on this issue has been nothing.
But
Ryan,
here's my problem.
Ryan, no. Hold on. Let me propose something that I think would be you would like a lot more. It would actually make a lot more sense. Say, for example,
I love functioning incrementalism. That's actually my policy preference.
Okay,
but...
so say, for example, the secretaries are instructed by Elon, Vivek, and therefore Trump to choose 20 regulations from their department that they see as the most harmful, the most like useless, whatever. Hey, I want you to work with the people that have been there for a long time, all your bureaucrats in each, little sub department, and pick, 20 to 100 per department that you find to be the most harmful or that frustrate the most people and you see very little benefit from. And talk, go out for a couple weeks or months and come back to us and, give us the list of the things that you find the worst, give us the pros and cons for each of these, and then we will then take them to the president. What do you think that's better than like throwing out a huge chunk of regulations?
I think that's a sensible approach. I think the inverse is slightly better, which is you department go through your regulations and tell us which ones you need and why.
Okay.
And if you can't tell us why you need them, you don't need them.
They would be able to. For most of them, they certainly would be able to. But the difference is because you and I both know there are so many of them that would take way longer. And you yourself said they have maximum 2 years to do this or 100 days or whatever. And so that just couldn't happen. It could not happen. If you wanted actual input from the people who know these regulations best, you would not be able to do that. Yeah. So the actual best thing to do would be do a list of the ones that are the worst ones that nobody in the department likes, that everyone has problems with on the ground. Tell us why that's the case. List them out, and then we will read over and give it to the president to cut those.
Yeah, I would prefer
incredibly reasonable. They won't do that ever. Though.
Hold on. The problem with this.
Why wouldn't they do that?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you why they wouldn't do that, right? Because you don't want to be the guy who cut a regulation that you thought no one needed, and then a year later to 6 months later, something terrible happens because that regulation isn't there anymore that you didn't foresee, or it was such a niche case. You will be crucified, right? So you have a whole group of people who are scared for their jobs, right? Who
they
will
can anonymize
never.
It, like that seems solvable. Like they can anonymize the input, but regardless, I don't think that. To be clear, I don't think this is better than the status quo. I'm just saying it's way better than what Ryan's proposing of giant chunks of the government.
I don't think anonymizing it solves the problem that Wick is flagging. One of my favorite things that Steven Pinker talks about is that you could run like almost every month for the last 20 years. You could have run the headline record number of people taken out of abject poverty, and it would be true. But the problem is like this sort of like in the scope of the world, small and diffuse, wonderful thing, it doesn't gather attention. And the problem that Wick's, I think, correctly flagging is that when you do something that has this kind of diffuse benefit to society and then runs the risk of lightning rod political attention on you and your department, it is on some level career suicide, which is I think why
they don't care about that. That would be true. That'd be true in most instances, but they don't care about political consequences.
Right. That to our first point. That's why it has to be these guys.
But this is why I'm saying they could do this easily.
Someone else, but I think these are the guys who actually might be positioned to do this. I just had I guess this is not regulatory stuff, but I had my heart broken by Biden because I voted for him really because I was like, he's going to be a one-term president. We finally have a guy who might scale back the scope of executive power. Woo! Oh boy, did I eat crow on that one. That went the absolute opposite direction, and that's how it typically goes. You must love the
Republican-appointed Supreme Court justices then. But
I would
basically, all I'm saying is that there could possibly be intelligent ways to do this, and the consequences that you said, aka like political consequences, they've shown they don't give a shit about, right? They don't care about those things, and so they could easily do this. They could do these things. They won't. They definitely won't because they care about attention and not actual progress.
You know what we do care about here? $5 from Turtle Emergency. Okay, to say this. I know it's annoying me making money. It's crazy, I know. Here we go. $5 from Turtle Emergency. Regulations are codified with approval from Congress to implement laws. The place to address regulations is Congress, not cabinet officials. Ryan, take it away.
That is technically incorrect. Congress passes laws, the departments pass regulations. So that unfortunately, you can address the law with Congress, but the whole point of these agencies is that it's difficult for Congress to deal with minutia because you need political will in both houses to pass laws. So they delegate their legislative authority to an agency where they have a big sweeping mission, and they say, "Thou shalt do X," and then the agency figures out how to do X. So when you go to Congress, you can change the law. Now, one of the things that changed with Chevron being gone is that the agencies have less room to interpret their own statute. And that means that it will be one of the benefits of the fire sale approach right now is that it would be harder to rebuild the cobweb afterwards. One downside of Chevron being gone is that it is going to be harder to re-implement things that break.
Which means we should be even more careful of mass cuts, right? Because if there's a bad consequence, it'd be really hard to come back from.
We've teed up the question. The question is, do you think the cost of inaction or action is greater? It seems you obviously think the cost of action is greater. I think the cost of inaction is greater, and I think that this is probably the only moment this could happen. I would love for it to be some other guys, but these are the guys we have.
I would like my answer to be answered, and I know
I would like $10 from the super chatter, and we'll get to you, Saxions, and we'll try again. Okay, $10 from Zephyr Hash. Sorry if this has been asked before, but what is the dollar amount that DOGE should save to justify its existence at the end of 4 years? And how much money should it take to run this department at max?
So
that shouldn't exist. It's not a department.
It shouldn't exist.
I don't think it costs anything to run it.
What do you mean it doesn't cost anyone? We're not hiring any officials.
No,
is that what you're saying?
It will. But here's the thing: is it will end up costing the American people a whole lot more. But on a monetary level, like the staffing costs versus the amount that they cut, they're probably going to save millions of dollars, like from federal spending. But the millions of dollars that they cut and saved probably were going to pretty good things that scientists or members of Congress wanted in their districts, and so it's going to be really harmful. But if all you cares is the dollar signs attached to it and not the actual progress of the people of America, then sure, you're going to save money. But it's very cringe and not true.
I think you're probably right, but I think you're off by an order of magnitude or two. Like when Reason or Wall Street Journal or Financial Times looked at what the probable cuts could be, they found $500 billion of just actual likely fraud and waste, and then $100 other billion of
well, most of that's military, right?
But here, maybe, but
they're not gonna do a large military cuts.
A lot of it's unallocated COVID funds also, or fraudulently claimed COVID funds. But the point is, I think the larger point, which I agree with you on, is even if this department cut $600 billion from the budget, which would be wonderful and worth doing, that's still a drop. Our budget is so enormous these days that even cutting $6 trillion
in 2023,
wouldn't actually reverse the trend. And I think where I would agree with you guys is that if we really were serious about budget issues and we're switching from regulation to budget, you would need to develop political will to touch entitlements. There's no other way to do it. And it desperately needs to be done. Now, maybe.
Can you be more specific when you say touch entitlements? Can you be more specific? If I snap my fingers, you're king for the day, okay, in America, dictator on day one, right? Entitlements. What are you doing to them? How are you touching them? Where on the doll?
I would change the way. Two things. If I was dictator or magical czar. If I was magical czar, I'd go after Social Security disability fraud, which is really, really hard to do in practice. But if I had a magic wand, that'd be great. If I actually just had policy control, I think we need to change the retirement age on Social Security for symbol workers. We need to look at different jobs.
Symbol workers. What are symbol workers?
Every lawyer I know works till they're 70 or 80, right? But if you're a bricklayer or you do sheetrock, you need Social Security earlier. And having a universal age at which you get benefits, regardless of the field that you're in, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think that there are fields where you have wear and tear on your body in a particular way that's different, and that there might be gaps that we could make up with disability benefits. But if we don't raise the retirement age in some meaningful way, I don't see how we save Social Security. I know I'm in the generation that just pays endless amounts of money into it and legitimately think I'm never going to see that money. Like it's a disaster. And not only is it a disaster, it's like, I forgot if it's the third or fourth biggest line item on the budget, but it's enormous. It's an enormous percentage of our budget. Something has to be done.
So basically raise the retirement age. That's what you would do. What do we think about this?
For people who are not in manual labor.
Sure. Yeah. For streamers such as I. Okay.
Yeah. For you, for me. Yeah. People who sit on our ass.
You will never retire.
You know?
Wick will be doing these until he's 80 years old. No, it is number one on the budget, and you're right that it is the thing that we if you care about the deficit, which I don't really, but if you do, then it is the thing that you have to address. Absolutely. But there's zero political will to address it, even amongst the Republican Party currently, which doesn't care about political consequences for most things. Even then, it is so unpopular among Republicans to cut Social Security that they just will never do it. And so this is why I say they're not going to cut Medicare, they're not going to cut Social Security, they're not going to cut the military, they're not going to cut veterans benefits, they're not going to do any of these like major ticket items. And so the only thing that's left that they can cut then, obviously they can't cut the interest on the debt, and so the only things left are these small little things they can point out to the public on Twitter, on a platform he fucking owns, to get hundreds of thousands of likes on these little tiny light items that won't do anything. And they're not going to do regulations either. I don't know why we keep talking about it. Like I know we wish they would, but they're not going to, because it's way more complicated to do that than to just cut $1 million grant from here and there and put it out into the public and have everyone cheer for you, because you get the attention that Elon and Vivek desperately need and they want, and you get all of the kudos and rewards from the Republican Party for cutting wasteful spending.
If they could do something about Social Security, that would be good, right? We agree on that.
Well, I don't agree, but like I have a different perspective of the deficit and debt than you do. But yeah, that's a deeper conversation. But like, yes, if you wanted to do something about the deficit and debt, you would have to do something about Social Security and Medicare. Absolutely, yeah.
Sorry, because my question has still not been answered, I'm gonna really hold Ryan's. Yeah, no worries. I'll re-ask it. So let's say you are. I'm gonna word it in a different way because I keep asking it and it doesn't seem to get answered. Let's say you're Elon and Vivek. Okay, you go to the Department of Education. And you go, okay, gotcha. Give me the regulations that you need, and I'll cut the rest. They don't answer. Okay, and you're like, I'm gonna cut whatever the fuck I want to. And they don't answer. And you have to cut the Department of Education because that's your example of the bulkiest department, or that's an example that you gave. Okay. You can choose a different example if you want. You cannot go line item by line item because that's incrementalism. How do you choose which 50% of the regulations you want to throw in the fire? Is it random?
No, I think
you cut 100%.
Yeah.
Awesome.
You tell them, you tell them, we need to do massive cuts. If you cannot justify your regulations, they are cut. You give them a deadline. If they do not justify them, you cut them. Like, okay,
great.
Or you could go Jonah's approach, which is the opposite end of the scale. I suspect the problem with I don't have a conceptual disagreement with Jonah's approach, by the way. The problem that I have with it is I wouldn't know. I couldn't say like top 20. I don't know what the number would be. It might need to be like, you need to give me a list of 5,000 regs. I don't know how many regs are in each department.
Right, but sure, but they don't do that. You have to make broad sweeps, and you're saying I would cut the entire department, or you're saying I would cut.
I'm saying I would put it on the people who are in the department to justify the need for their regulations by a deadline, and if they cannot do so, they are cut.
But you understood what I said, that it would be impossible to do that, right? You understand why that would be impossible.
The Department of Education is going to say, hey, I think all of these regulations are necessary.
Then they're cut. They failed the exercise.
What do you cut? Do you cut 50%? Do you cut 100%? What are you cutting?
I don't understand why this answer isn't... Like, it seems like I'm answering your question, and what you want is me to give you a number.
Well, Ryan, here's the problem. If they say 95% of their 100% of regulations are necessary, but you don't see 5% cuts as reasonable or sufficient, how are you deciding what else to cut if they gave you good justifications for 95% of them?
I think that's right. That's how
Then
you have
what?
to do it. You would have to explain what the process is and explain what counts as reasonable, and then put the monkey on their back, right?
And
Well, then
they
it just
do, and they
but then
do
it just becomes
95%.
then it just becomes Elon and Vivek's choice, because it turns out they're good. There are people in these departments who can justify most of these regulations, and that's almost certainly true for the people that
I
know them the
actually
most.
don't think that's right.
Okay,
I
but
think
let's run the
Randy
hypothetical
Quinn,
that
I
it
don't think
is.
that would work out.
Let's run the hypothetical that it is. I want you to just take it as a given that these people are going to make up some reason, however it makes sense in your head. They'll make up some reason. They'll find some justification for 95%, and as much as you push them, 5% of budgets doesn't cut it for you, and they can only justify 5% of cuts. What do you do then?
Hire them and get new people.
Correct.
Okay. What if you? I guess
So
my question is.
it turns out you don't actually
what happens
care.
if you have a rebellious
Well,
department?
Ryan,
That's
that
not going
answer,
along with the mandate of the president.
all that
You hire
answer, Ryan, that answer just proves you don't care about the actual efficacy of the regulations. You just want quantity of regulations down.
No, I want a process that will result in cuts.
Yes, but
Right.
what if 95% of the regulations actually have really good justifications, and that's actually true?
To
What do you do?
be fair to
You just
Ryan
want the
here,
cuts anyway.
to be fair to
No,
Ryan,
that's not the
okay,
case.
if I may, right?
I do believe that's the
he's
case.
asking. You're asking him to imagine a hypothetical world in which he is wrong in his assertion. That's what you're asking him to do.
No,
Because
I said you can.
The question would be, what if, right? What happens if we run the exercise as Ryan does, and turns out they can't justify most of these regulations? Then would you be okay with them being cut?
It does not assume that they're wrong. It assumes they can give a good justification for the
Correct.
regulations,
Correct.
whether or not on net it is good. But they give you a good reason that it exists and that you should keep it. And now it's up to Elon and Vivek and the secretary of that department, who is Trump appointed and will follow whatever Elon and Vivek says, to decide which of these 95% you want to cut, because you told everyone, oh, we're going to cut 50% of the regulations. Now you got to pick out of that long list of good justifications which ones you want to pick.
Sure. We would
just
ask the
up to them.
reasoning and rationale from Vivek and Elon. I don't think they'll give it. Like, I think you guys are right. I don't think they'll do this, right? But if we were going to, if I was in charge, for example, which I am an honest man with someone who could actually do this, I would give you, okay, here are my standards, okay, for what the decision-making process will be. Here are the metrics by which I will judge whether or not a reason that is given to me merits consideration or not. And then we would choose a set of metrics which would result in a large cut, whether my goal be 25% or 50% or 75%, I don't know, right? But I would choose metrics which I have a reasonable degree of certainty to know would result in a large amount of cuts. And then as things break and we figure out we cut too much, we grow them back. That would be the...
But here's my problem. Here's my problem. Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's a procedure.
Right, but here's my problem. Let's say you. I don't think this is crazy. This is crazy land, and I think Ryan can justify this in his own worldview. Let's say the department that implemented the regulations can justify the regulations. Okay, do you believe that is one that's very possible?
I think it's extraordinarily unlikely, but possible.
Okay, can we live in that world for 2 seconds?
Sure.
Okay, great. You go in and you say, okay, great. I need someone to justify these. No one can. Or sorry, everyone can. Everyone can justify this. And you go, no, you don't understand. Not these tiny little regulations. I need to cut 50% of this department. No one can give you proper justification. So you hire an outside source. You pull them in. And they go, well, I don't know how the hell to look at this. There's 50,000 regulations on the books. I don't know what's necessary and what's not. How do you make these massive cuts if no one who knows these regulations internally are willing to give you justification for cutting 50% of them?
Basically, this is what we're saying. Like, in the hypothetical where I'm just wrong, then hopefully people admit that they're wrong. I don't think I am wrong. Is the larger point.
Hold on.
But the issue that the actual way you do this is that you set up the procedure with a thumb on the scale, because that's how you set up procedures like this. In district court, when we have motions for summary judgment, the standard is there is a standard, and to which point you set a standard. You tell them what you have to show in order to keep the regulation. In district court, the standard is there can't be a disputed issue of fact about something. There has to be no question of fact, and on the law you win. So what do the parties do in Southern District of New York? They have to put in what's called a 56.1 statement, where they list all their facts, and the other side lists all their facts, and they cite all their sources, and they quote their deposition transcripts and their documents, and then the judge and their clerks go through, and they see, oh, is this a disputed fact, or is this an undisputed fact? And they can rule on it that way. It's not impossible to set standards and set a protocol and then go through it. And then if you have, and I think this is what they would end up doing, and kind of what you and I were talking about earlier, if you want there to be cuts as a matter of like policy, you set your thumb on the scale because you say like, you got 100 days, and you force them to prioritize the ones they're going to defend because they don't have time to defend all of them. Like there's of course exactly to make the system result in more or less cuts. You could also say, if you can come up with the 3 sentences about a reg, I'll keep it, and then you'll keep everything. You know, like the process does impact the outcome.
Ryan, that's exactly the problem I have with it, is because if you only have 100 days, or even best case scenario 2 years to decide all of these things you're going to cut, but then also you have all of these like very strict regulation, or very strict like procedures that you need to go through to prove that your regulation is good. They need to do fact-finding missions if you're part of that department to go find all of these things that to fit each of those boxes, which sometimes means you need to spend more money to go hire the people to go do those things, to find the statistics to make sure that these things is being effective, to do all these things, which goes back to Staxium's first point at the very beginning of this, that if you're trying your best to be efficient, now you have everyone working to make sure that their regulation that they like and they think is impactful stays, and now that means the most of the department is now just not actually doing the work of the department for 100 days at worst, or at absolute best case. But then at worst case, you do all of that, and then you still cut a lot of things that are really beneficial, and you have all of these harms anyway. So you get a really inefficient government, and you get a lot of things that are cut that could actually have been very good, but you don't have enough time to actually decide if they were good or not. So they just put their thumb on the scale, remove them anyway, and get all these bad harms. So either way, this seems really, really bad.
And you know what seems really good? It's $10. The $10 from Zephyr Hash, okay? But Wick, how much damage are we willing to take in the process of finding inefficiencies, removing them, and then reestablishing them months later? What happens in the months in between? Well, that is the question, is it not? And this is a debate we're having tonight. Again, I think Ryan did frame it well. Which are you willing to take more of? Damage now or damage later, right? A constant source of low-level damage, or some immediate big hits, politically unfortunate hits, but a better overall outcome in 20 years, right? And that is the question at hand.
Which is to be determined if it's a better outcome.
True. I mean,
because obviously we would argue that these are not short-term losses, right? That like if you just remove all of the regulations and suddenly you have like lead in the water, just as an example, like you have possible millions of people who just suddenly die. You have an entire workforce that shrinks. You have a GDP loss, like we go into recessions that impacts hundreds of years down the line. Like,
well, let's even do a regulation that if RFK Jr. gets accepted, we know they're going to try to do, which is remove fluoride from waters, which saves billions of dollars in dental expenses in cities 100%. Across the country. That alone. Billions and billions of dollars. That alone will dwarf anything that the Department of Government Efficiency can and will save. Just that one regulation from that one department, and they don't. It's not scientific backed, and doesn't for them it doesn't need.
How
to be.
would we smuggle in the trans chemicals into our waters to trans the children?
Exactly.
Like if we get rid of that, how are we going to do that? That's
true. I think also something that we forget about the government is that it invests in the welfare of the people, and that they make their money back through taxes based off of the efficiency or the investment that we have made into people. If they make more money, then the government makes more money, and they use that money to make the people make more money. Like it's all just kind of this cycle. And if you remove one tip of the scale, then suddenly people's lives are devastated and the government makes less money anyway.
Ryan, I think one of
the toilet in San Francisco.
There's plenty of stories about there's plenty of stories about wasteful spending, but Ryan,
this is the argument you've made is that things will break, which I have conceded things will break. The counter,
you said it's harder to rebuild now because Chevron's gone. Now you said things
will be harder to reenact.
That's really bad. You agree that's really bad that it's now harder to recoup some of the losses that you're facing when these.
It depends what you cut.
Of course it does,
Also,
right? If we cut good regulations, bad things are going to happen. If we cut bad regulations, good things happen.
The San Francisco story was that during the mass homelessness in San Francisco, there was a lot of feces on the streets, and a company decided we want to build a public toilet outside of our building so that there will be less feces on the street outside. So they said we'll donate the cost of the structure and the cost of the labor to the city. And they mapped it out, and it was about $500,000, $600,000 to build the thing. And they said, we will pay for the whole thing, City of San Francisco. And the City of San Francisco said, well, that is only about 70% of the cost. It's going to cost about 1.5 million to build the toilet. And the rest of the costs were regulatory costs.
Okay.
And, again, this is one of the challenges that regulatory issues are both federal and local stories are always the punchiest and the most fun to tell. So I'm telling a local story, but that kind of cost, there is no public toilet here because of regulations that make it impossible to build one, is very hard to spot. When you walk down the street, you're not going to go, oh, regulations, but these things happen all over the place. And the
sounds like a good case for incrementalism.
No, exactly.
They don't exist.
Because here's the problem. There is no one on this panel that's going to deny that wasteful spending doesn't happen. Me and Jonah both obviously agree.
The public toilet issue is a regulation issue, not a wasteful spending issue.
Okay, sure.
Well, it's both, right? Because theoretically, if it got approved, the regulation would lead to more wasteful spending, right? So it's both, but
I think
the regulation is the source of it.
More likely,
nonsensical regulations.
Like when you have rent control, what does it end up with? Less housing. The end result is hard to see.
Yes, understood.
Jonah, do you agree that regulations can sometimes be bad? And there are for sure some examples of bad regulations. Excellent.
Absolutely.
Okay, so these anecdotes don't really serve any purpose because we've already agreed with this. You're arguing with someone who isn't on this panel who's saying that the government is 100% efficient.
And it's the same thing that people like Rand Paul do when they point out these random grants that scientists have, that they're $100,000 to investigate the sex life of beetles or some shit like that, right?
And it turns out,
but it turns out that that's one, very important, but most people just don't understand why that's super important. But then two, it's a very, very small portion of the budget. So people think things are happening, things aren't actually happening that change the budget, but they even if you want to take the best case scenario, Ryan, where all of these things happen, it just makes people then complacent. Like people who on average would be pushing for more transparent government, more effective government, become much more complacent when they're like, oh, we've cut millions of dollars. Look at all the things Elon has saved the government. Like our taxpayers are in good hands with Elon and Vivek. So even if you're like a budget hawk person, this is still not a good idea because they won't actually help you do anything, and it will just make the people who are on your side the most complacent and not want more change.
It's tricky when you go back and forth from budget to regulations because they are meaningfully.
They're connected though. They're pretty closely connected.
They're connected, but the point that I made earlier, which I think is why it's hard to go back and forth like this, is that there's no way that cutting regulations is the thing that changes the budget deficit. Like we said earlier, the way to do that.
Yeah, it depends on the regulation, right? Like it depends. But
am I misremembering the beginning? Am I misremembering? But sorry.
No,
go.
Hold on, Chance. If you want some space to talk,
Chance,
go ahead.
Like
I'm not. We're not.
I'm enjoying this. This is fine. I really don't have much else to say. I mean, Ryan is right. I agree with just about everything he's saying. I think it's a little presumptuous to assume all public employees are virtuous, people that want the public good rather than just people that want a paycheck like everybody else.
Who the fuck said that?
But anyway.
Sorry. Okay. Real quick on what Chancellor said. One, the people, most of the expertise in government, we're talking about the federal bureaucracy, not like people in national parks and like whatever in the states, but in the actual federal government, they could be taking private sector jobs that would pay much more than what they get paid in a lot of these government jobs. That's A. B. On Ryan's point, a lot of the times the regulation and the spending are pretty interconnected, as with the example of the public toilet. If they decided to build it, it would cost a lot more than otherwise it would have cost because of the regulation. And then C, something I brought up that just I guess no one ever talked about is that they're not going to do the regulation stuff because as we've talked about, it's way too complicated. It takes way too much effort and looking into these things to not make a disastrous outcome. So either it's the case that they won't cut that much regulation or just cut stuff that doesn't actually do anything for anyone, or B, they're going to cut wide swaths of regulation as you advocated for and cause really, really bad harms they now can't recover from because of Chevron.
Jonah, question for you. Is this, say you, right, you could choose the heads of a department that would had the same goal to get rid of excess waste. I think both Staxiums and you have ceded that there are regulations you would get rid of if you could. If you could wave a magic wand, right? There are spending that you would get rid of if you could. You find are wasteful, like fraudulent, etc. Right? So I understand you don't trust Elon and Vivek. Same Z's, okay? But if you could head up a cabinet like this, who would you choose to head something like this up?
It obviously depends on which department we're talking about.
Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE.
Well, I wouldn't do that, right? I would pick secretaries that are very competent in their field and want to actually progress. And like for HHS, I'd choose like a YIMBY person for HHS.
So here's the thing, if I may.
Like a medical researcher for,
like, before 9/11, we didn't have the Department of Homeland Security, and we assumed all these agencies would simply talk to each other, communicate with each other, and these things, and it would be fine. Obviously, it wasn't fine. So I don't see necessarily it being a bad thing to have some sort of funnel where all these secretaries and the heads of these various organizations can go to kind of report their findings, and someone who could kind of like help that process move along throughout these agencies. Because I think you're right. I think the best people to know what regulations are and where the wasteful spending is are the people who serve in those organizations. But at the same time, they might need an outside force to kick them in their butt to get them moving.
That will add more inefficiency than you think it will, because we've seen every time you add another step before there's either approval for something or whatever. Like we see this in the NIMBY/YIMBY movement. We see this in improving 100%. Environmental infrastructure projects. We see this all across, like when you need a large public comment period, but it turns out it's really really complicated to do that, and it's really just the companies who have the most incentive to go against this are the ones that are actually doing the public comment. Like there's so many both political incentives but also procedural hurdles that you will make up by just like adding another step in the process that I don't think you're actually going to get that much out of outside of just like having another pair of eyes view it, when you could just do that either after the fact, or you can have the department head be someone that's actually competent and look over these things before they get there. I know there's a lot of them. They can't maybe do all of them, but that's wye you have, sub-department heads and sub-department heads who are all competent people. This is just making sure your staffing is good, right?
I think they won't, because to the point that you were making earlier, Chancellor, which is I think 100% correct. The people who move up the ladder within these agencies, you cannot ascribe a perfect motives to, which I think no one here does, but what you can ascribe to them is that they very likely have a pet issue. And that's why they're in a branch of government that does that pet issue. And when you ask a specialist, does your pet issue matter? They tend to say yes, but that's not necessarily a broad perspective.
But they also know why it matters, right?
Yeah, they justify it. But their answer is always yes.
Does it get paid?
So you need to come up with a process, and I think we've drilled down this over and over again. So
companies,
a process which forces them to justify what they're doing, which the government should technically be doing more than it does now, anyway, and then justify it not to their own standard, but to some standard that is then set by mandate of the executive. I think we kind of
agencies, at least in the military. I can speak for the military. I can't speak for other agencies. I did work in the military. They tend to prioritize and to promote people who make that agency money, right? People who can get the bigger budgets in the agency. Whether that agency needs it or not, they are the ones who are good at justifying the costs of that agency, right?
I think
they are the ones that get promoted.
I think there's also a flaw in this logic as well, where we're just assuming that because it's their pet issue, that they're able to justify it, rather than it could be the other way around, which is because they can justify, because they see the impacts of that issue will spread throughout the community, it becomes their pet issue, right? Like I care so much about housing, I care so about YIMBYism. Do you think that like my pet issue would be having college students go to city council meetings simply because that's something that I care about, or because I think that it would make a good impact for society, so that's something that I care about? Does that make sense?
And that's why I think that somebody who does housing regulations for a living somebody who, for a living, chooses to create regulations that make it harder to build housing, shouldn't be the person whose only opinion you ask about whether we need the housing regulations. What we need to do is create a process and get somebody in charge of it who has your point of view and say, I hate housing regulations. Justify your shit to me.
Yeah,
Justify. And because people like you don't work as career bureaucrats in housing regulatory organizations because it's antithetical to your beliefs. If you truly love housing,
this person is called the
regulations,
Secretary of
you
Housing and Urban Development, by the way. That's the person who has the final say on these things, and also political appointees, so they're not entrenched in this forever necessarily, or they have the perspective, the political perspective of the person coming into office. So that would be the person that should be the one dictating to people, hey, here are the regulations we think are bad, here are the regulations we think are good, not some outside business people who don't know how government works at all.
That's gonna be a Trump appointee, yeah.
I think my frustration with you is
it probably would be, yeah,
of
but
course.
better than four.
I think we're actually manufacturing disagreement at this point. I think we largely agree on.
No, because you're pointing to regulations.
I got 30 minutes left in the show. Let him go. Okay.
I think the reason why you think that we're agreeing is because we can point to regulations that we disagree with, but the entire mode for the reason why we think those regulations are bad are not from the fiat regulation bad. It's rather, I don't want to see harm in my community. So I see, I think that that's our fiat rather than yours. Your fiat is like, just regulation bad. Oh, well, they think regulation can sometimes be bad. So we agree. But we have a completely different process that brings us to the conclusions that we have gotten to. And I think that that your mode of determining how to function government will necessarily lead to harm in our community. So I 100% disagree with you.
Well, but I've agreed it will cause harm. It's a trade-off.
Okay, so right.
I'm willing
you
to
think less harm, right?
I'm willing to accept the breakage. I think
it's less harm, right? Obviously, from your perspective.
I think in the long run, yes.
Okay. Right.
How do they recover easily from the harm done?
What?
How do they recover easily from the harm done?
Well, I don't know that it's easy. I think that it might be challenging. I think what
how would they do it then?
Is more than likely if they go down this road, and for the reasons we said, I actually think it's rather unlikely that they do. But if they went down this road and actually did what they've talked about doing, what would probably happen is that they would lose one or both houses of Congress the following term. And then the rebuild would probably be the pendulum swinging the other way, done by the Democratic Party, who then gets to run on, hey, they took away this really important thing, we should put it back. Which is why first-term presidents will never do this. But I think that probably is how the rebuild happens, because there'll be political.
So then wouldn't we just come back to square?
So yeah,
one?
you just reinstate the things you didn't like.
I did the laundry yesterday. Why do I have to do it again today? Oh my God, it's a Sisyphean task that we can never do it. We're always back to square one. I gotta do the goddamn laundry and the goddamn dishes every fucking day. Yes, it's a cycle. It's a process, and you need to prune. Much like a forest, you have to every once in a while clear the brush. And does the brush come back?
It's really good.
Yes.
It's not saying that we're pruning. It's basically that we're pruning a tree, and then we come back the fucking next day, and it's the exact same thing as before. And I went,
it's not the exact same thing as before.
Okay, no. But here's
there's no way. If they cut, let's say hypothetically they cut 50% of the regs. Mm-hmm. We've all said why that might not happen, but let's say that they did.
Let's say
they could, with political will, put back in the really important ones that got.
You don't think that there's any possibility?
Way they could put in.
Here's my fucking question, Ryan. How did we get here? How did we get here? If not people going, hey, let's rebuild these let's build these regulations to cover up this harm to the community. And all you're saying is like. How are we not just going to get back to where we were before?
And the interest groups that put those regulations in there to begin with, most of them still exist, and so there's not going to be the pressure against those interest groups to not do those again, right?
And it's fueled because it's fueled because now we're going to go like just fucking any regulation, because before we said none of these matter. It's clear that they matter. We need to just like throw anything at the wall and just see what sticks. I don't understand how that's not in your world, how that would happen.
Chancellor, you're raising your hand. Sorry, we're doing
it. Yeah. Okay. talking about, I don't know why we're still going hampering about regulations, but think about airports, okay? Back in the day, back in the 60s, airport flying was very luxurious. It was something the rich, the hoi polloi, would do. But now it's
Carter
a very,
deregulated it.
yeah, it was
Let him finish
deregulated.
his point, okay? Chancellor,
Okay.
go ahead.
Sorry.
And those regulations didn't come back. It's not like it became a fancy thing for rich people to do again. Now everybody flies all the time. So just because you get rid of a regulation doesn't mean it's going to return. That's all.
Right. I would obviously point to airline regulations in the 70s as a bad regulation. I think it's really good that we deregulated how much foot space needs to be in an airplane, and making sure that there needs to be like proper delicatessens offered to the consumer. That does not need to be there. And now any person can fly anywhere on some shitty ass airplane where you're cramped the whole time, and it's $50 to get shuttled, and it's incredibly safe. Obviously, I think that it's good that happened. I feel like I am just trying to make a distinction between good and bad regulations without saying writ large regulation good or writ large regulation bad. I am not making that claim.
It seems like Chancellor doesn't want to talk super highly of regulations and talk about budget. Chancellor, do you think they're going to cut? Do you think they're going to cut a big chunk of the budget? Do you think they're going to be successful, or do you think they're even going to try?
I think they're going to try. As far as being successful, who knows?
What do you think they're going to try to cut?
Well, Department of Education, probably some of the DOD. There's lots of waste there. Who knows? I mean, I can only speculate, really, like the rest of us.
So they're
Right,
going to get
but
rid
go
of the
ahead and
Department of
speculate.
Education.
I just did.
Yeah, I think they could probably find hundreds of billions of dollars of discretionary cuts. But then, as we said, if they were really serious about balancing the budget, they would need to go after non-discretionary items, which is not something
Ryan,
that DOGE is empowered
where's
to do.
that money? Where's the hundreds of billions in discretionary coming from? Is that mostly from military? Is that from the rest of the discretionary?
I think it's probably mostly from what I was reading this week. It's mostly a waste fraud measure. It sounds like a lot of money. It's actually not that much when you think about the Pentagon never passing an audit. When
well, we're talking about 2025 budget, right? Not like COVID relief funds.
Fraud,
we're talking about like 2025 budget, not like COVID relief, like fraud stuff, or like any like. I want to know what things that stick around year to year do you think they're gonna cut that's worth hundreds of billions of dollars?
Before you answer, I got a question for the panel. It's just a yes or no. Another lawyer friend of mine wants to come on. Is it cool if we invite Zetsway on here, or does anyone
Totally.
have a problem?
Yeah.
I will say just to defend Ryan for a second, it has kind of been a 2v1, so if this becomes a 3v1, I think that might be bad. But if he defends Ryan, throw him in.
Okay,
Throw him in.
I
Great.
asked him.
Throw him in.
I did. Zetsway.
So,
Sorry.
like for example, I can send a link if it's helpful, but reading from Reason magazine, although, quote, waste, fraud, and abuse, close quote, clearly are not the main drivers of runaway federal deficits and debts, my point, as I've acknowledged, the sums involved are not exactly chump change either. Last month, the Government Accountability Office said federal agencies reported an estimated $236 billion in improper payments, defined as payments that should not have been made or were made in the incorrect amount during 2023. I mean, it's not like there isn't hundreds of billions of dollars to catch. The issue is that catching hundreds of billions of dollars is not enough to balance the budget. So I think that they probably will accomplish that because it's doable. I don't think that'll be enough to accomplish the larger goals.
Sure.
You think they're going to cut $200 billion or anything close to it?
Yeah.
200 billion? You said billion, right? With a B?
Yeah, I think they will.
Wow.
The goal was $1 trillion, but we'll see.
The question you should be asking.
1 trillion?
The question you should be asking is the harder question, which is, let's say they recommend $200 billion of cuts, and then Trump recommends other stuff that blows up the deficit the way he did last time. Now it's worse.
That'll obviously happen. Yeah.
Like, this is what I mean. Like I'm rooting for them. I wouldn't bet on it. But I'm rooting for them. I think there is waste.
Would you bet on them cutting $200 billion? It doesn't need to be on net. It's just like $200 billion that they cut that would have been in there otherwise. Would you bet on that?
Do I think the Trump administration will find $200 billion
No.
of things?
No, but on net.
Elon and Vivek will find $200 billion of cuts, even if Trump does more spending. That makes that not matter. Will
They'll
find
recommend $200 billion of cuts to him?
Yeah.
I think
Or recommend versus actually do it, I guess, are very different. But
that's the challenge, right? Because their only role is advisory, so they can, they can recommend shit, and then whether he does it.
What if they just start recommending entire agencies get cut, which would probably require?
Which is why it's a pretty safe bet they're going to hit $200 billion.
Yeah, then it's just they're doing literally nothing, right? They're not actually doing anything. They're just recommending giant cuts.
I can go, hey, I think Department of Energy doesn't need to be there, and then just walk away, and then go, okay, I did my job. Yeah. Perfect.
If Musk and Vivek were really trying to settle the bet between us as their primary motive, they sure could win it. But hopefully they have other things.
You know what? It's hold on, because this is important. A friend of Elon Musk watches this show pretty regularly. It is not out of the realm of possibility that Lex Friedman could pass this information on, right? And he, the troll that he is, could just fuck with us. Okay, hey, that's Lex. That's a non-0% chance of happening. Just throwing it out there.
Lex, if you're watching, I'm an impeccably credentialed lawyer who loves small government. Give me a shout.
There you go. Okay, Zetsway, you want it on? You're here.
Yeah.
What do you have to say? So go ahead.
We can see how these things are done prior. Like in California, they had the whole council on reparations. And so that they can do their own investigation to make their recommendations, but eventually something has to actually be passed. The question is, are the recommendations you're going to be make impactful enough to the people that they're going to want it? So if they actually make recommendations for, say, consolidating departments, and that is actually a compelling thing, if the government doesn't do it, then it'll look poorly on them. If they suddenly make recommendations, just say, we recommend getting all departments because we didn't do any research and we just don't give a shit, then nothing's going to get implemented and nothing will happen. And so the question is, right now, agencies, we very rarely close agencies, and closing an agency doesn't mean getting rid of it entirely. So if you said the Department of Education, you might say, I want to keep the FAFSA and other loan programs. However, the remainder of it doesn't seem to be of use, so we can roll them all into a Department of Finance. You don't need a department for just to administer to the FAFSA. And so when you have, and as it stands, all we do is just keep getting more and more agencies and more bloat. And then trying to say well, what's the point in cutting that one? Feels like someone saying how do you get healthy? Well, there's no one cheeseburger I don't eat that will make me fit. You're but if that's your answer, then you just do nothing forever and nothing ever changes. You can't, in the same sense, you go, otherwise, would all of you be against ever raising taxes unless you can prove it's going to raise $2 trillion in taxes, at which point, if you can't, then I guess there's no point in raising those taxes. It's a matter of saying that you'd need a consolidation and saying, what value does it serve? I think something actually Elon Musk said that I did like, where he said, you sent an email that says, what did you do in the past week? He goes, what exactly are you doing that's a valuable service that we feel the federal government should be doing? And if one person comes back and says, well, I administer to the FAFSA, we administer this many loans, this many people, and I'm processing these numbers, and we have such and such amount. You go, okay, that person's valuable. The next person's like, well, we had some extra, but part of the funding is related to Inuit, education specifically for the Inuit, and says, is that really a federal thing? Is that more of an Alaska state-based thing? So maybe we don't need that person. And so because each of these budgets, it's just, because if you just look through a list of all the agencies, a lot of them feel like that there's a lot of repetition of the same thing of toxicity and toxic substances and toxic chemicals and chemistry. And you're not chemistry, but rather just saying it probably is actually, I would almost guarantee that it's not 495 all agencies that have distinct and guaranteed no regulations a problem here. The more complex you make it, the more also that's where you get waste, is when you can hide in a random agency that no one knows about versus saying that there was 100 agencies, each one with their own budget that we can more properly assess.
Sure. I think the problem here is that our perspectives of reality are probably at odds with each other, and I don't know if we're going to be able to counter. Because what I would obviously say is, I'm not familiar with the difference between toxicity, toxic chemicals, and all that stuff, but I would probably believe that those distinctions matter and came there for a reason. And that if you ask someone, they would say, oh, actually, there's a huge difference between toxicity, and toxic chemicals. And here are the distinctions. And here's why it matters that these are approached by in vastly different ways, because they get into the water system in different ways. And we need to target them in completely different, materially different ways. Does that make sense? Like, I
Like
think,
you have a different employee, not a different department.
but I don't know how,
Like the
I don't know how
FAFSA might be a
broad
different type of loan.
So
Oh, go ahead.
remember the I wish I could remember the name of the case, but one of the big Supreme Court deregulation cases recently, basically the EPA was claiming that a underground water was a lake.
Yeah.
And it fell within the definition of lake. That way they could regulate the underground water that wasn't mandated by their statute or the authorizing rule. They were playing with the language, right? And I think this is the essential problem, and this is what we were talking about before. When you give people who really care deeply about an issue control and discretion over the laws and the regulations within that area, they're of course going to advance their pet issues because that's what they're there to do, and they're going to advance the size and scope and power of their agency because, as Wick said, that's what they're there to do. That's how they keep a job, and that's how they get to advance their cause. So if you're ever going to prune this stuff back, these are not the people that you can rely on. You have to put pressure on them from some outside source, which is why, wisely, we appoint political officers at the top of these agencies who can dictate to the career employees, no, this is what has to be done, and if you can't do it, you're fired. Get another job.
So the Department of Government Efficiency shouldn't exist then. It should just be the department heads that dictate what regulations are good and bad to their departments.
Not at all what I said. The Department of Government Efficiency is a great measure. It unfortunately has not been able to accomplish its goal in a meaningful enough way. But why would I don't see how you got from A to B.
Because you are saying that political appointees can be the ones that are outside of the department that can go tell people, hey, this are the things we want, the things we don't want, the inefficiencies,
they're outside
whatever.
of the specialization of the department.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So if you have those people that can then fulfill the will of the new administration, why do you need the Department of Government Efficiency if you believe that the
Department of Government Efficiency fulfills a much different, but though very important function, which is it's essentially the investigation of waste, fraud, and other things, which, quite frankly, is what one of the larger questions about DOGE is why, to the extent they're investigating fraud and waste, why is it necessary when we already have this office? And the answer is that this office has not, by and large, been adequately successful. They've identified the waste, but the waste is still there, right? So you can read articles where, like the one I just read you, where they said that was actually the government agency I named. They identified $240 billion of waste, but the waste is still there. So someone has to actually.
I think you're misidentifying why the waste is still there. Is because there's a lot of, as even you said, and I'll agree with you, a lot of interest groups and people like that who very viciously advocate for a regulation or against a certain regulation or whatever, and there's not a lot of people. It's a one-sided conversation. There's not people pushing back against that. There's no one on the other side saying, actually we don't need this regulation. But there's no reason why those incentives wouldn't work against the Trump administration, especially if there's big money interest involved, right? If there's like big companies that would be impacted, and then all their like hedge fund Wall Street people would get really pissed off that now they can't take advantage of these regulations. Elon and Vivek would fall into the same problems. But then also, you don't know which ones to cut, right? Like as been most of the topic of conversation, it's impossible to know which ones are the ones to cut. And then once you identify the ones you want to cut, you're probably just doing incrementalism at that point.
To Steelman Ryan a little bit, right? I don't know if I need to, since that's why he's here now, but I'll try. Like this idea that it's impossible to know, it might be very difficult, but I reject the idea that it's impossible. Like sometimes I feel like people play this game, and they do this with healthcare and a few other things, right? Where like healthcare is such a complex issue, it's impossible to fix. They do this Xenox parable thing, like before we cross the room, we have to cross half the room, but before we cross half the room, we got to cross half of that, and they make it seem like it's an entirely impossible task, this Herculean thing, this trial that we can't get over. I don't know if that's true. I think that while it might be very difficult, I think that we can it is very possible, and again, I don't think Elon will do this, but I think it would be very possible for an agency to go through, identify, and eliminate waste if they were sufficiently empowered. And I'm tired of pretending like it's not. I think it's just true.
I think that I would kind of agree with you, but I think that is incrementalism, and that percentage will maybe be 2% of the budget, and that's just not what any of the people who we're talking about are advocating for.
When I say impossible, I mean it's impossible to do it the way that Ryan has recommended. We could
Right.
do like for example, the way I recommended, where they pick the top 20 or top 100. That seems pretty reasonable to me. It seems like they could do that in the time frame. It seems like the political consequences would be less bad than if you just cut a giant chunk of the department. Like there are ways to get rid of bad regulations that are not just getting like wide sweeping, getting rid of things. But the way that Ryan is recommending, in the time frame that they have, the political consequences that they're under, either it's going to be the case to get rid of a huge chunk and it's really, really bad for a lot of people, or it's literally impossible to do the things that he says he wants to do with the outcomes he wants to have in that time frame.
Right.
That's what I mean.
And obviously the problem as well is that what me and Jonah are advocating for, or what we would say when we cut all of this stuff, like we cut maybe 2% of the budget or something like that, of like small little, I would even say less than 2%.
Yo, 2% of the budget is a lot.
No, that's crazy.
Yeah,
I meant
like if you could cut 2% of the budget, okay, I'm listening.
Exactly. I 100% agree, and that's why it's almost like pales. I'm trying to decrease it from 50 to a tiny little number. I'm like 2% is still insanely high. I think that we could make some for sure cuts. We could probably save some money if we cared about that, but it would have a negligible effect on the average American, and that's just not as sexy to Vivek and Elon.
No, I
like
agree.
I think that they're just
But take your analysis a step further.
Mhm.
This is for the exact reasons you just said. This is why people who are committed to incremental cuts never do anything.
No,
Because
I heard
exactly for that reason. They realize the tiny amount of cut I could do will have no real benefit, no real impact. It will still piss off the interest group involved, and I'll still bear those political consequences. And it literally never happens. The problem isn't that incrementalism would be great. I would love incrementalism. The problem is I'm 40 years old and the shit has never happened. So, at what point do you say it's just not a thing that happens? And then what?
Obviously, I would say that we haven't reached that point. There might be a point in which I would say, yeah, we have to slash fucking 50% of the budget. We are nowhere near there. What? No, I would have to live in like a corrupt like the DPRK or something like that.
Here's Ryan. Here's the real take. Okay, I got the real.
Argentina before we do something about it.
I got the real based, actually true take. Okay, if you want if you want to happen, what you are saying you want to happen, where people are willing to do incrementalism and actually do it well, you need a popular movement behind that incrementalism, behind that regulation change, or else there's never going to be, there's always a one side pushing for something to stay in place. And if there's not the opposite side pushing for it to be removed, such as with NIMBYism, YIMBYism, that will not happen. It will not get, because there's no political incentive, there's no monetary incentive, there's no incentive so there needs to be some
have you ever tried to come up with a political slogan for incrementalism?
It doesn't need to be about incrementalism. It needs to be about this.
When do we want it? Eventually, right?
The actual good example.
It's not sexy.
Well, no, that's not true. I disagree.
No, I would say civil rights is an example of incrementalism.
I actually disagree. An actual like modern example of this is the YIMBY stuff, right? Like
for building things.
Yeah. The actual good example of this is a lot of young people are super YIMBY and are like super anti-NIMBY, right? That's an example of a lot of young people being like, hey, actually, fuck you. We want to build like apartment like complexes in this area, and we want to cut the regulations that are preventing us from doing that. And I know those are like state, local, whatever, but that's an example of there are a lot of people who have a very specific goal, and all of the regulations that stand in the way of that goal, they decide which one of those to get rid of, and that's how you actually get the incrementalism that you want to get. Is people actually have to give a shit about the regulations.
I would also say
that's actually a really great example, and why people who are opposed to too large a federal government are opposed to it, because actual people in actual communities are so much better able to influence their local government than there is to develop a movement around the federal government. So part of the reason why these regulations are a problem is that they actually, to the extent they conflict with local regulations, prevent people like the people you're describing from making a difference. And that's
no shit, because the federal government affects more people, so obviously it'll take more effort to implement those policies.
But
the
problem is, in your town hall, when people are showing up and voting YIMBY or showing up at like a board meeting talking about the planning board, they can just show up and do it. When you're talking about a federal, lay people don't actually have access to these agencies in any meaningful way.
Which is why we should have political representatives as the people who make these decisions. That's crazy. The people who
have access to these agencies, and my billable will shock the shit out of you. So it's one of those things where if you can't throw money at lobbyists and lawyers, you don't get to play.
I guess my question. I have a question, real quick.
Question,
Ryan.
but then we gotta get to closings because I want to respect.
Sure, because I feel like there's maybe we're talking about two different types of regulations, and I might be a little bit confused because there's one which is like, no, this seems really important and people really care about this and they're willing to fight for it. We have interest groups about it, and that's really hard to take down, but it's still like kind of wasteful. And the second is completely meaningless statutes that just kind of get in the way to bother people. And if we're talking about that second group, there should be no interest groups that are getting in the way because they're meaningless according to your definition.
There's always an interest group. There's always an interest group.
Okay. I don't know how to...
No, because somebody makes money off of the way it is, and that's the interest group.
So that's another way of saying that
essentially... There's always an interest group.
Right. That's another way of saying that there are reasons for all of these regulations and that they probably went through some sort of process and probably have some reason that they benefit.
Sure, there's a reason. There's a reason there's regulations against building housing. Yes. The question is because are those reasons good?
No,
and are those reasons something we should listen to?
Of course not. I would obviously agree that the reason why housing regulations happen in municipal counties is because people are like, fuck you, I want my house to increase in price, and I want to make sure that when I retire, I can give a little nest egg to my kids.
But it's rational from their perspective.
Yes,
exactly. Thank you for the Twitch sub, Parallax. Parallax says DSP's brother needs better acoustics. Well, thank you for the Twitch sub. I really appreciate that. Gang, it's been a conversation. It's been a panel. Okay, I enjoyed it. I hope you guys enjoyed it too. The Department of Government Efficiency, we had such an efficient discussion, I think. Such a great example of what's to come. I appreciate all you gentlemen for being here, for taking time out of your day to come and play with us and talk with us. I really appreciate you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm going to give each of you an outro, closing thoughts, closing statements, and please tell people where they can find you. I asked you guys for links. None of you gave me a damn thing, okay?
Oh, really?
Yeah, no one gave me a goddamn link to post, but I would want them...
And you never even asked me for a link.
It's in the group chat. I asked everyone, drop your links that you want linked. I asked everyone. No one said shit.
I don't work in your Discord. I love you, buddy.
Yeah.
But,
I didn't see that.
Okay.
I do it for the love of the game.
Fair enough. But here we go.
If you have links you want shared in the description, give them to me here, and I'll throw them in.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, good to know, Wick.
But fair. Yeah.
Look at that. You did.
Crazy. I know. It's almost like just please help. Okay. Anyway, gang, give your links when you give your closing statements. But before we get to that, if you've enjoyed this content, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, throw me super chats, throw me gift subs, all that really helps. I got to keep the lights on somehow, right? Here's the deal. Tomorrow, we're probably going to have I'm either going to take a break or I'm going to have call-ins. My Friday show had to get canceled because that's when my tooth appointment is. It was going to be Tuesday, but they moved it to Friday. So it is what it is. So hopefully by the end of the week, I'll have a smile for you guys. Let's see if that really happens. Wednesday, we're going to be talking to Lactoid, Katiusha, and a few others about the Trump cabinet picks. That should be fun. Tune in to see a left and right perspective on the different cabinet picks so far. And then on Thursday, we're going to have Brianna Wu and Short Fat Otaku to come talk about the election aftermath. It should be fun. Okay, with that said, we're going to get closing arguments from everyone here. We're going to start with Chancellor, and we're going to end with our friend Ryan. Chancellor, give us your thoughts.
Okay, well, I haven't had a whole lot to say, I guess, this whole time. But I only have one more thing here. The purpose of a system is what it does. It's not what it's called. It's not the name on the placard in front of the door. It's what it actually does. What does the Department of Education do? Just think about it.
Where can people find you? Oh, and that's why thank you for the gift subs. If they want to find you, buddy, where can they find you?
I'm on X. I don't know. Just Chancellor GM. That's me. I'm around somewhere.
Okay,
You'll find me.
check them out. This way, what you got?
Yeah, so I'm more hopeful for it. I actually don't expect too much of it. I think I mentioned in chat once where government agencies are measured by how much they spend, not by results. So being able to analyze waste if you don't actually have an outcome-based data, it's gonna be difficult. But I do believe, and I think Ryan's with me in terms of saying it's more about limiting federal government. Any of these things should probably be done on a more state and local level. So just kind of deferring away from the federal government. But yeah, no, we will see as we go along here whether they do nothing or everything, or whether it is just a meme. So I have no links or anything, but
or everything.
Always a pleasure.
No, thank you for being here. Really appreciate you jumping in, trying to save my boy Ryan, who's getting a little dogpiled there. But I think he did well. Staxiums, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, I think it reminds me of the conversation sometimes about universal versus means testing welfare. That essentially, sometimes you can just say, I'm going to give a specific amount of money to everyone, or I can make sure it's only the people who deserve it. But when you say it's only the people who deserve it, you have to input so much money into ensuring that the people who deserve the money get it, that it ends up spending more money than if you just let everyone have the money. So I think that that's the case here. And to answer not Chancellor's question, the Department of Education educates the public. Thank you. And I will also say I am Staxiums everywhere. I post on TikTok the most. You can find me on Twitter, not X. Elon will never change that for me. And YouTube as well. Thanks for having me.
No,
Rick.
thank you for being here. I always appreciate having you on. Hope to get you on more often. You're really great. Check him out, gang. Reward him for his time spending his day at my house chatting to chat. Well, thank you. Appreciate you. Check him out. Next up, Jonah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we've basically come to an agreement that we think it's unlikely he's going to do he as in Elon and Vivek are going to do widespread regulatory change. They're going to do very small budget changes. When it's going to come from grants, it's going to come from earmarks. And these are going to be the most harmful things they can do and the most small portion of the budget you could possibly get. And so if we're talking about will DOGE be a good thing? No, it won't be, because they're going to do the things that gather the most attention, the things that people don't understand why the money is important, which are things like scientific grants, but actually end up having really big impacts on our society when you get things like technological breakthroughs, things like that. We can think about, as long as we want, if they wanted to do regulations, how would it be done? But they're not going to, because it's not politically popular. It doesn't get them the most attention. It's really complicated and hard to do those things. And so we can wonder all day about it. That's not what they're going to do. They're going to cut maybe a few $1 million or maybe $100 million, whatever. But it's not going to end up actually doing anything for the budget. It's going to be really harmful for our scientific research and for helping meet people and constituents in specific districts that need the help the most. And it's going to get a lot of attention for Elon, and people are going to think the problem is solved when it very much isn't. So even if you're a budget hawk, you should really, really be opposed to this. Also, nothing to promote. I do this because I like debating, and yeah.
Oh, well, Wick exclusive. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate you, and I'll have you on more often. I appreciate you reaching out to me on this subject. I'm glad you did. Thank you. Last but certainly not least, Ryan.
This is a lot of fun, and thanks for everyone for participating. You can find me on X, Ryan C. Mullally. So in heaven there are no laws, and in hell there's nothing but laws, and procedure is rigorously enforced. And that's ultimately the question we were talking about today. Whether you think there's a risk to having too much law. And I can tell you as probably, I don't know everyone's jobs here, but as the person on this panel who regularly interacts with these laws and is paid to maneuver through them, there is too much of them. And you shouldn't have to pay someone like me to fix some of these problems for you. If you are an Elon Musk doubter, maybe you don't believe his story, but he told a very funny story about having to kidnap a seal to do sound testing for the rockets that he was launching, not once, but twice, where they could strap the seal in and see how it reacts to large noises in order to pass a regulatory inspection. And if that seems odd to you, I might point out that Title 21, Part 139 of the Federal Code of Regulations sets rigorous standards for the diameter of various pastas, which can be enforced. There's a lot of nonsense out there, and if you leave it in the hands of the political class to determine which nonsense they are enforcing today, you are essentially at their mercy unless you want to pay somebody like me to show up and defend you. And I welcome the cash. So it's great for me. It might not be great for you.
Check him out, gang. Thank you for being here. Hopefully he can use all that regulatory money to get a new microphone. But we'll see if he does. Okay, thank you everyone for being here. We're going to rate out. We're going to rate in prime kind. Let him know it's a hate rate. And we will see you either tomorrow or Wednesday, 6 p.m. Eastern. It'll be a surprise. Check it out. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye. Bye.
Later.
Bye. I'll give it 5 more seconds. Everyone just leaves, just zoomed out. Oh, yeah, we'll see. Anyway, bye.
Bye.
Hey, thanks for coming by.